Welcome to See Beneath Your Beautiful, where guests share stories of adversity and perseverance, which inspire, encourage, and challenge us. We embrace these tough conversations, intimately exploring our loves, fears, and hopes with a delicious combination of depth and lightness.
Hello, I am Stacia Aashna. I am a clinical hypnotherapist, certified life coach, and I work one-on-one with clients. I also teach groups and classes online and in person. And I live in downtown Chicago. And in Chicago, I host these things that I call sister circles. It's a community event for women who want to gather together and form conscious and supportive connections through community.
What led you to this work?
Oh my, it's a loaded question. Such a seemingly easy question.
Hoping so.
Yeah, it is. So I think like a lot of people who get into any sort of profession where you're helping people, it's often motivated because you yourself had some sort of experience where you overcame something. I grew up the youngest of 5 kids in a house where I experienced things like poverty and abuse and grief, loss, and it put me in some really dark places. I was very fortunate at a young age to find good people that could support me in the form of therapists, counselors, spiritual teachers. I found meditation at a young age. And I went from really being in a very dark place with myself to finding the light. Not that things necessarily go away completely. It can become so much more manageable and life can become better. And I have experienced that tremendously. And as a result of that, I went on to learn the different techniques I'm using, mainly hypnosis, some coaching skills, and then a therapy modality called internal family systems, as well as mindfulness meditation. These are things that really helped me. And so I'm sharing those with my clients.
I heard you on a podcast and hired you to help me. And we only worked together for a short time, but it really helped. The internal family systems was so fascinating, even though I feel like I've had something like that before, but somehow the way you approach it and also having gone through some stuff yourself. So I felt like I could talk to you about anything was really helpful. What would you suggest for somebody who's suffering? Meditation can't be just the answer, but I hear that meditation is a key to helping. And is that just because we're getting out of I feel like it's a pinball machine in there, like it just ricochets back and forth, the same thoughts over and over. But when you get into your body and the breathing and think about other things, is that the point of it?
So there's a lot of different types of meditation. First off, there's so many different types of meditation. I'm teaching mainly mindfulness meditation. I do offer my clients a lot of guided meditations where you're going on sort of a visual journey. And I find that those are really great for beginners who are having trouble just sitting and focusing, getting objective with their thoughts, which is what mindfulness meditation is really what we're doing. And we can incorporate other sorts of mindfulness practices where you're not just sitting. But the guided meditations tend to be really nice for beginners. Just getting used to sitting. You don't have to sit as well. I always like to say this, if you want to lay down and meditate, no problem. That's my opinion and experience of it. But really what I am trying to teach my clients through mindfulness meditation is to differentiate yourself from your thoughts so that you can become an observer of them, where you're not always just sort of, like you said, pinballing, like you're sort of ricocheting off of your thoughts and emotions just constantly. You can kind of sit back, differentiate yourself, get curious, and then make more conscious choices where you're not just always reacting impulsively from your thoughts and emotions. Because sometimes we have these perpetual thoughts that are not necessarily helping us. So if we can sit back and kind of differentiate ourselves and cultivate this healthy pause, and we say, how do I want to respond to that? So mindfulness conditions people to do that, to really sit back and observe their mind and their emotions.
Mm-hmm. And then I feel like IFS sort of helps you discover where those thoughts originated from. like the stories we tell ourselves.
Totally. It helps people to do that. It helps people to see how those stories might be manifesting in different areas of your life. Also in our body, we do a lot of somatic work with IFS, and we can see how also certain thoughts, stories are actually sometimes creating real pain in the body or tension in the body. And IFS is wonderful because I think when we first met, you had done some inner child work, but the inner child work you had done was just kind of visiting with your inner child. But what you had noticed was that your inner child was sort of not fully integrated in the present.
Yeah.
It was like parts of you had been fragmented, but still living in the past. So with IFS, one of the very important steps is called updating. And that's where we take these parts of ourselves that might still be sort of living in a way in those past experiences, and we update them and integrate them in the present so that all parts of us are here and now and not just stuck in those old stories.
That was the real breakthrough, I think, for me, was that, I've done the work where I'd go back to my childhood where I was, sexually abused, and then the house was dark and scary and I didn't want to be there. And then you suggested that maybe little Hara wanted to come see what was happening now, that I'm a professional business owner, that I'm happily married, and just removing her from the situation freed her. I guess she was so stuck there. And that's just so simple, but I was stuck in my mind and in my beliefs.
It's so common that this happens. The other part that's really interesting when we do this updating is then we can do the recovery process, which means that if little Hera was stuck there in that house, it might be that she's sort of shut down, probably, right? You have to shut down qualities. We call them the essential qualities of yourself, of herself, in order to just be there and probably be focused on just kind of surviving. But when she's updated, she's no longer there. What can then happen is you can reclaim some of those essential qualities. So those sometimes just naturally start coming back. I've noticed this with myself, with my own IFS practice, is as I've integrated aspects of myself that were kind of lost in the past, naturally, like a lot of my essential qualities have come back. My creativity, my playfulness, a lot of different things, different talents that I had to repress because I was going through trauma and I just didn't know how to handle everything. That stuff came back.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it did. And it's still happening. I'm still doing this. It's been such a beautiful process. And I think that you've had some of that experience as well.
Yeah, I feel a peace since our work together that I haven't felt in a really long time. Another thing that you really helped me with was my self-limiting beliefs about, my value of what I was worth professionally. And it came from this belief that as a child, my sister was the smart one and I was the dumb one. During our session, I truly I could feel little Hara feeling little like the dumb one, like totally. It was a feeling in my body. But by the end of that session, I had no proof that I was the dumb one. And I don't feel that way anymore. I have so much proof that I'm not. And so that is so interesting to me that I held on to that for my entire life. And now I just feel so free of that concept.
That was so wonderful because it was like you were still sort of seeing it through this limited lens of your child self. And then when we kind of zoomed out, it didn't take you long at all to see the truth, like from your adult perspective, what was really going on there. That, of course, you were not dumb. And your sister had her own challenges. And it was really cool to see how that just clicked so quickly for you. And to now hear again that it hasn't been an issue since then is really cool. And I think I gave you a worksheet at that point in time to really dig up the proof that this limited belief was true. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. There is no proof. There was an experience which we also validated and said, it makes total sense that a little girl would feel that way, especially based on what you were experiencing. But that's not the truth. And you can see that very clearly now.
Yeah. So why do we get stuck in our child mind? And why aren't I just a mature, sophisticated woman, which I kept expecting to just somehow magically happen to me, but never did. And so I had to do some work. But why are we always so stuck there?
That's a great question. Unless we start learning different ways of being, of practicing like consciousness and working with therapists, working with coaches, taking courses, reading books, going to, support groups or meditation classes, it's just natural that we're going to keep those programs.
Yeah.
We develop these beliefs about ourselves and our lives in childhood, and it becomes the program. It's like the wiring. It's not hardwiring, thank goodness. We can change it.
Yeah.
That's just what happens for all of us. Again, there's always, at any age, for any person, I really believe that we can find relief. And there are a lot of wonderful people and books and programs out there to help.
Can you talk about any of the things that you've gone through so that I can see how far you've come? Like, instead of the generic trauma and loss, what were some of your things that you've gone through?
Thank you for asking and appreciating that. I do share a little bit online, but I don't share in too many details. Not because I'm not trying to share. It's just that so much of my writing and stuff online is about the people that I'm writing to, it's about my audience and the people who are so wonderful that follow me on social media. But I'm writing from my heart and from experience. As I said, I grew up the youngest of 5 kids. And in my household, my father was a very violent alcoholic and drug addict. And my house was one in which there was always chaos and violence. There was various types of abuse happening. We were also poor. My father could never hold a job. My mother worked her butt off. She was a nurse. And the way that I functioned as a child was I became very hypervigilant, could never relax because you were always just expecting that something was going to happen. Things were going to fall apart. What was going to happen next? Always. It was every day. It was every day.
Mm-hmm.
My mother also was in a very difficult position, obviously, but she had her issues as well. And she would have full-blown hysterical panic attacks all of the time. And I wound up kind of taking on the role of being my mother's caretaker at a very young age and trying to protect her. She would be just totally hysterical and angry, and it was very difficult. My parents divorced when I was 9. There was actually a celebration. It was like having the demon out of the house. And that might sound strange to people if you have close relationships with your parents, but this is a very extreme situation. And I, as a child, never felt love towards my father.
Mm-hmm.
There was no sense of safety there at all.
Mm-hmm.
It was very scary to me. And my mother remarried. She married a man who was also abusive, came into the home, and was very verbally and emotionally abusive towards me. So my teenage years were my home was never safe. Essentially, it was never, ever a safe place. And when I was 15, a brother of mine, he passed away. He was in a motorcycle accident. And that kind of sent me over the edge as a teenager, to the point where I was constantly thinking about unaliving myself, making plans for it. There had to be an intervention stage to stop that from happening. And at school, I was miserable. I never fit in. It was just a constant struggle era.
Yeah.
But I also was really lucky to find some tools and people at a young age that helped me to get out of this. One thing that I did get as an influence from my parents was, we didn't have much ever, but we always took refuge in nature. Both of my parents loved being outside. And so that was like my place, was just being outdoors. That sounds really simple, but that was very important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And continues to be a very therapeutic thing for me, is just being able to retreat into nature. And I started seeing therapists at a young age. especially once I moved out of my mother's home when I was 18 and I was on my own, then I was like, I got very dedicated and serious about finding help. I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like kind of desperate not to continue to live the life that I was. It all affected me in so many ways. I wound up being terribly codependent in my relationships, in the most awful patterns in my relationships that was like trying to save men, specifically men who were addicts, which is common if you grow up the child of an alcoholic. And during that time, support groups became a big thing for me. So I would go to CODA and Al-Anon meetings, which I always recommend to people if they are looking for help, especially if you don't have the cash flow to be able to hire a therapist or a coach or somebody to support you. Those are great. So those are some of the more detailed things about my upbringing.
Thank you for sharing that with me.
You're welcome.
What is the sister connection? What is that about?
So they're called sister circles. Yeah, I've been doing this for a while now. And while I've lived in Chicago, I've led groups for a long time, different types of groups. But what I noticed with my female clients was this sort of across the board. They were all saying a lot of very similar things. And one of the things that I was hearing a lot was, I feel very alone. I don't really have a lot of support. My friendships are kind of lacking, and I just wish I had more friendships that felt authentic and deep and connected. And like, oh, well, what if I just brought all you together?
That's awesome.
And so I'm starting up a new virtual group because I have women I work with all over the world. But in Chicago, locally, I lead circles for women who are in Chicago or live close by. And we have a different topic every time. It could be about boundaries or about intuition and really connecting with our intuition. What does that mean for each of us? So I'm kind of leading the group, but it's very co-creative. So there's a lot of just dialogue back and forth in the group. It's really about community. A lot of these women have become friends, which was the big goal for me, as I really was like hoping that this would help each of them to really find community and sisterhood through the group and to support having that sort of deep dialogue and connection that they were all seeking. A lot of them are women who have kind of evolved from, as they've been dedicated to doing their own personal work. Some of them are clients, some of them are not, and they're just women who are meditating or they have therapists. They're just really deep at their work. They've evolved from some of their are like older, younger activities, like going to the bar all the time. And not that there's anything wrong with doing that. It's just that that was sort of like, that was the only function for what their friendships were about, is like, there's just kind of built around drinking together. That's very common. It's just about creating something that's fun and supportive. I love them. They're always just really connected, and just a lot of good stuff comes from the circles.
I have a hard time having women friendships. I have a handful, but making new friends is really hard, and ones where we can talk about anything. So your group sounds lovely.
Thank you. I actually really think it's facilitating that too, right? To my delight. If somebody is first joining and they can come in whenever they want, there's often a little bit of hesitation and nervousness around being in a group of people that you've never met before. But it doesn't take long before women start opening up.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that just happens naturally because they see other women doing it.
Yeah.
And they just kind of start to feed off that energy, and they feel very safe. I run it very support group style. So we have like a list of agreements that we all agree to beforehand about confidentiality and allowing like it to be a safe space for emotions. That's like super important to me, is that everybody feels safe that they can actually share.
Yeah, that's really good. And that you're there if something needs to be said. That is the problem that I have, is that I'm not an expert and I'm on my own journey, and everybody is, but also I have no training. So I'm not trying to offer anybody advice.
At the same time, though, honestly, I think there's a lot of therapeutic value in just having compassion, just listening to people and having compassion, knowing your boundaries for sure. This is not a client. I'm not trained to handle this, whatever. But even if we could just give people compassion, if somebody is coming to you and breaking down and sharing their story with you, that's probably because she feels you as a safe person and she really needs that. So
it's a real gift that I've been given, that I can see people and be with them in their hard times and not shy away from it. I'm just so impressed that the younger me is now this older version of me that is okay with that. I think I told you that I've volunteered to take pictures of people who are losing or have lost a loved one, go to the hospital, that their baby has died or whatever. And so the fact that 35-year-old Hara is 54 years old and saying yes to that, I'm just fascinated with myself.
That's amazing. Oh, I love hearing that.
I just love that we mature and grow and become new people and can keep evolving. That is so great. And I just want to say again that you really helped me on that evolution. And so thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. I love that you've still got little Hera there and you're sharing with her what you're doing now. I think we've talked about that with IFS, actually, like bringing your child self, imagining them being there with you and seeing what life is like. And if you're a very visual person, which I know you are, and I am as well, it's wonderful to kind of get this sense of awe that comes on the face of your inner child when they're like, oh my gosh, are you serious? We're doing this?
Right.
Yeah, I've experienced that too. Invited my inner child or different versions of my inner child into my life just to really see, like, hey, look at how good life is now. Look at how much agency that you have, how much freedom, how much I play and have fun. It's wonderful to feel that sort of freedom.
My inner child is sitting on a way too big of a chair and her feet are swinging because she's just so like, this is cool, man.
I love that. I love that. I live in a high rise in downtown Chicago on the 29th floor, and I overlook Lake Michigan and Lincoln Park, so all this green space. And when I first started doing IFS, I remember like bringing her into the apartment and she was just looking out the windows. This is kind of what I was experiencing with my eyes closed and just having this updating experience and her just being like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. Are you serious? This is where we live. We don't live in that house back there, in the past where it was very stressful and scary. And we live here all by ourselves. Yes, this is where we live. Just really grounding into the present, taking that aspect of my psyche that was still stuck there and saying, nope, this is where we are. This is what we get to do. And this is the kind of freedom we have.
Does IFS work for everybody, or are there naysayers about the practice?
I haven't come across any naysayers, but there may be. I think there probably is for any sort of therapeutic model. But right now, it's getting a ton of support. And as far as whether it works for everyone, I, again, don't think that any therapeutic model would work for everyone.
Yeah.
I think that there are people that take to it very quickly. You are one of those people. Hopefully you don't mind me sharing any of that.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I really did. I loved it.
Yeah. For some folks, it might be difficult to really differentiate yourself and see aspects of yourself as parts that you can just differentiate yourself from. Doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just might take a little bit longer. But most of the people that I work with, we dabble in it at least. Again, for some people, it's like perfect for them. It just totally works. It's effective from the start. And then for other folks, it's a little bit more difficult.
I can see that. It just made so much sense to me that, that part of me is trying to keep me safe. When I could see it for what it was, then it so freed me.
Yeah, it's a very compassionate model that we see. Even these parts of us that might have destructive behaviors, they seem destructive, but these parts of us are not bad intended. They are trying to help us. They might be totally, doing it in an unconscious way that's not effective. But for that aspect of us, the intention is not to hurt us. They're actually trying to help us and support us. So things like the inner critic, or even we call these firefighter aspects, but parts of us that might take on addictive qualities, things that seem obviously like bad for us, and they are, but it's still a way of protecting ourselves, usually through escape or distraction. So when we can actually look at ourselves through that real lens of self-energy, of compassion and understanding, that's where the healing and the transformation happens.
I'm so glad we did this. I just really so appreciate you.
Thanks for doing this. I'm so happy that you're doing well. So happy.
I feel so light. I feel like oh my God, I want to cry. I feel like that little girl twirling in the summer sun that I've been longing for. I feel just full of self-love and genuine. All those years of just begging for it, and somehow it just feels so obvious to love myself, all of me, the way I am this minute, exactly the way I am. What a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, it makes me want to cry as well. It's beautiful, and you totally deserve this. You always did.
Thank you.
I'm so happy that you happened to listen to that podcast and find me, and that we had the opportunity to work together. You are such a wonderful, strong, awesome, loving, sensitive woman, and you deserve to be happy and to feel peace and everything that you're feeling now.
Thank you. You have definitely made me rethink also that I'm not a crier. I cried a lot with you. It was such a beautiful experience. Thank you so much.
I hope that you like that and enjoy that. I think it's wonderful. It feels to me like you're not censoring anything now. You're crying from joy. You're crying when you feel things.
That's it exactly. That I've always been jealous of people who will show emotion easily. And I'm just so happy I have emotion. Somebody said once that if I didn't cry at the Notebook, I was soulless. And I did not cry at the Notebook.
I hate the Notebook
because it was terribly acted. And I'm not soulless. I'm a good critic of bad movies.
Thank you. Okay. Everybody loves the Notebook. I hate that movie. So I'm glad you don't like it either.
Did not buy into it. Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of See Beneath Your Beautiful, hosted by Hara Allison. And thanks for your ratings and reviews. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Stay tuned.